Self-deception is the absolute key to our human collective breaking free of the chains of our mental health crisis.
It doesn't have to be this hard. I don't think it has to take this long. I don't think I have to suffer.
You actually have to learn to emotionally regulate to survive. Unfortunately, that also can come in tandem with becoming more hyper-independent.
Just reading me up and down.
You change behavior by understanding what behavior needs to change, but what language is actually pulling the strings and getting the person to do it, thinking that it's totally justified.
I have this very acute awareness that my awareness hasn't changed anything.
Awareness, more often than not, leads people to justifying their bad behavior and habits rather than actually changing them.
So what is the key to breaking the subconscious patterns that are holding us back? Today's topic is quite honestly, maybe the most important podcast you could listen to this entire year. It's about how to actually break the subconscious patterns that are holding you back. And I'm joined by Bizzie Gold, who is just such a disruptor in multiple industries. She's founded multiple 8-figure businesses. She's a mom of 4, and her current work really is all about how to rewire the patterns that hold us back, that sabotage the things that we want. And it's really eye-opening to be in a season where I'm really deeply looking at patterns. And something we talk about in this episode is my awareness of my patterns hasn't shifted the pattern itself. So if you've ever wondered, how do I actually create change in my life? This is the episode for you. I'm so excited to share it. Bizzie Gold, welcome to Powerhouse Women.
I'm so excited to be here.
Doesn't it feel like this was kind of a long time coming?
Years.
We've kind of been orbiting each other.
I've always felt that about us.
Yes.
And so many times people would meet me and say, there's just something about you that's just like Lindsay. It feels like you guys are just meant to meet. So
I love when the timing aligns because I trust whenever it does. And I was telling you the work that you're doing right now, which we're going to talk about, how do you actually break these subconscious patterns that are holding you back? I have gotten to go into like the tippy top of the iceberg of all the depth, your podcast, the resources, the program you've created. So it'll be cool because this is an interview where I'm getting to learn along with our listeners just about how powerful this methodology you've created really is. And I'm so excited, especially excited about your new book coming out, which is called Your Brain is a Dirty Liar. So let's start there. Your brain is a filthy liar.
Yeah,
even
I
better.
felt like filthy just felt a little more wrong.
It feels just raunchy.
Yeah, raunchy. I wanted that effect. Where you're like, ugh. I want you to be disgusted when you read it.
So let's unpack this. What do we misunderstand about what our brain is actually wired for?
At the very base level of my work is something called brain pattern mapping. And I think to understand what the brain is wired for, we have to understand how brain pattern works. From the very time we are born, we come into this world innocent, curious, and only wanting to seek love, right? That's what you feel when you hold a child. They're helpless. They are completely dependent on adults to survive. What ends up happening to a child? Do they get love? Do they get patience? Do they get empathy? Unfortunately, even in the best household, that is not what they receive. Anyone that has ever had kids before, you're not your best self when you first have children. Even if you have the best heart and you're so excited to be a parent, you're sleep deprived, you're out of your element, you've never done it before.
Right.
All of the triggers are in your first childbirth experience. So even if a parent goes above and beyond to try to give their kid a nurturing, peaceful environment, that doesn't happen. So think about how far that can descend into chaos. There are parents that are addicts. There are parents that are dealing with domestic abuse, right? So that the spectrum can go really far. So even if the best possible household still doesn't nurture that innocence, curiosity, and love, then what happens when that trauma completely explodes off the scales? These are all inputs. When the child is growing up, the child is constantly observing its environment, trying to understand its world. And when we say understand its world, it's observing and trying to create rules, much like a mathematical formula. So if you were to imagine that you walked into a bar and you were to just kind of do a quick scan of the environment, would you be the type of person that would notice if there were maybe some seedy characters that you want to stay away from and watch your drink around?
100%.
Right?
Yes.
But not everybody would do that. Some girls would walk into a bar and they'd be looking for what guy whose attention they want, and they're focused on what they want from somebody else rather than the situational awareness piece. So already just from the little bit I've kind of watched you online, I already could tell that you were the situational awareness side of the brain pattern spectrum. This is a blessing and a curse, as you know. Can make relationships very challenging, hyper vigilant, and so aware that it can be hard to be very present relationally.
True.
So when we talk a little bit more about brain pattern spectrum, there really are essentially two halves, and what happens to you in that early childhood environment will split you either into the left side or the right side. You're definitely a left sider like me. So in that bar scenario, two people could walk in, totally different childhoods, and you're going to have a very different experience than maybe a friend that comes with you. But perhaps if I came to the bar with you, we'd walk out, we'd get interviewed, and we'd have virtually the same experience.
Okay, yeah.
It's because of the inputs we experience during early childhood and how those inputs create mathematical formulas that our brain uses to observe reality. Objective reality is something that I think we've all noticed slipping away. I don't know if this has been your experience, but if you just look at the last, let's say 4 to 8 years, politically, socially, social media, even with the uprising of AI, the concept that there is such thing as objective reality has just faded away. Is it a filter? Is that cosmetic surgery? That line of what's tangibly three-dimensional real and what's not has basically disappeared. For some people's brain patterns, this line is what their brain is most concerned about. What's real? What is a lie? Black and white thinking. And these sort of brain pattern types tend to be a little bit more on that far left side, like what we're talking about. And when we look at what happens in those early childhood years with the mathematical formulas, what we have found with brain pattern mapping is actually the easier your childhood environment is, the more love and the more consistency and the more your parents placate you and kind of let you get your way, the more you actually split off to that right side where you start to become fixated on what others think about you. You lose your situational awareness. Everything is very self-centered. And if life is challenging for you, if your parents are emotionally dysregulated, if they have a bad temper, if you realize, mom's in a bad mood, I have to deal with something on my own, the irony is that it actually gives you a better outcome.
Interesting.
So when we're looking at these kind of brain patterns, it's really important for us to understand that the simplest way to understand it is input equals output, which is why I like to lean on that analogy of a mathematical formula. It is really that simple and it's that hard coded. So whatever your brain pattern is that develops in those early childhood years, it starts to project that formula into every observation, every relationship. So if you look at it from more of a spiritual perspective, people start to say that you attract the vibe, you attract people that kind of fit what you're looking for. That I'm sure is true on a more multidimensional level. But even more than that, we observe and label traits according to the formulas that we know, and they may or may not be real. I think that's kind of like the biggest mind blow.
Yeah. And I think I'm just hearing so much within this because it's hard to look at someone and say, what happened may not actually be what happened. It's our interpretation of what happened. That's hard for me sometimes to think, well, gosh, this is the way I remember it, but is that what happened? Or was that the way I was seeing it through my brain pattern, essentially, is the terminology you're using.
So the process of memory encoding, I think, is a really fundamental piece of understanding what goes into making our brain pattern. And memory encoding is something that essentially functions like trying to take a file on your computer and move it to a folder, right? Let's say that you pull something off the internet, you're typing a file. As soon as you feel like this document's done, what are you going to do? Well, if you're me, you're going to let your desktop get totally a mess and you're not going to put it anywhere until you're like, I have to organize this. Too much. But if you're somebody that's more organized than I am, you would complete your document, you would move it to a file so that you can find it. Seems reasonable for most people. The brain works this way with memory encoding. One of the things that's important to remember is there's something called the emotional tagging hypothesis, which is such that if you're highly aroused in an emotion, you're much more likely to store that to long-term memory.
Yes.
So this is important. And it's why I bring up the piece about childhood innocence, curiosity, and love, because a child is not jaded. They're not hardened. They don't have anything to compare and contrast to. So even the smallest bit of guilt or shame or anger that a parent unintentionally offloads, that's going to be an emotionally aroused memory. So children experience and encode traumas that don't match the same definition that we would use as an adult.
Yes. And that's been really fascinating to learn how the brain is essentially in a hypnotic state until 6 or 7. And we also don't have the objective, or that might not be the right word to use to describe this, to understand the nuances of adult behaviors. So a parent leaving, it's not, maybe there's something going on. The relationship between mom and dad wasn't healthy. A little child just internalizes that as, that must be something wrong with me. And I didn't understand how powerful that time period in someone's life really is. And if I think about it, I'm 41. No one was telling my parents this when I was, those formative years. So how do these patterns actually get encoded? The emotional experience, the filing system that's so clear. And then it sounds like you've developed ways to describe what they are when you're describing the right versus the left. What are some of those other patterns that you see over and over and over again in the way that our brains form?
So when we look at brain patterns, the brain pattern type would be the descriptor or the label, but it's really labeling shared characteristics.
Yeah.
So if when you go into your visualization, picture a spectrum, so like a scale that's divided into left and right halves. Essentially what happens is if you start in the very center of the spectrum and you were to hash it out, let's say 10 hash marks all the way out to the far left side. Every hash mark you move to the left, there's certain qualities that will increase and decrease. So as you move out to the left, you're going to see situational awareness increase. As you move all the way to the left, imagine what happens if you're hyper aware of situational awareness and you can't ever be present. You'd start to become paranoid. And this does happen to people. So there's a Goldilocks and a Three Bears scenario here, because there's like just enough situational awareness that gives you a positive outcome. There's just enough relational awareness that gives you a positive outcome. But there is this kind of shifting of scales that is very much going to align with how somebody perceives their own quality of life, which to me is the number one marker. There are people that have a hard life, and it sounds like you've been through some life changes recently. The reality is that for some of us on this left side that I'm now describing, even when life is hard, you typically report a high quality of life.
Yes.
Right? Because essentially underlying, it could be worse, always trying to look on the bright side. I can get through it. There's an inherent level of emotional resilience that is also built in as you move toward that left side, because your inputs from childhood were not all flowery and sweet and placating, and you didn't get to have your way, or you didn't get to be the center of attention, or things did go wrong. So you actually have to learn to emotionally regulate to survive. Unfortunately, that also can come in tandem with becoming more hyper independent, but we'll put a pin in that.
Just reading me.
We will get
up
there.
and down.
The hyper independence, that's part of what causes the relational issues.
Yeah.
It can be hard to be in a partnership when you're so hyper independent.
Totally.
So one of the things that increases is that situational awareness piece. The other thing that will increase as you keep moving those hash marks out to the left is a quality like workaholism, or at least career feeling like your place of safety and control.
Sure. Yeah.
Above and beyond relationships. So if you were to imagine, as you become more focused or secure in your career, unfortunately, the relational piece will start to slip off to the side.
Sure. And that makes sense when you're describing it along that spectrum.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. This visual is so important to understanding the nuance, because like you said, the nuance is really important. And I'll mention now that there are actually only 5 brain pattern types. Okay. So you can take the whole world, 8 billion plus people, and every single one of them fits inside of these 5 brain pattern type clusters. And we're
one of the 5?
One of the 5.
Okay.
And it's a fixed position. And I love that you brought up that we're in a hypnotic state until about age 6. Our work has found that brain patterns are completely hardwired by age 5, but the bulk of that wiring is done between ages 2 and 5.
Okay.
For some children, it's younger, but most children only start to actively remember their life around age 2 or 3, which is why we skew toward 2, so that people can absorb it without pushback. But in many cases, it's unfortunately even earlier than 2. So situational awareness is the first quality that we're looking at. Then that the relationship with career or work is feeling like a place of safety. You're also going to start to see relational awareness and presence decrease along with those 2 markers. So it's not that and I think this is probably true for you, it's not that you don't understand what you should do, because that's usually front and center. A person that's on that left side, they know what they should do in a relationship, but there are a variety of barriers that they're bumping up against in dealing with the other person that's either prompting them to pull back to stay safe, or leaning into hyper independence because they don't really trust the person that they're in a relationship with. I'll go ahead and just drop a little breadcrumb here. Most likely the people that you've been in relationships with are on the right side of the spectrum.
Yeah. I think so much of the healing and what the changes last year forced me to look at for the first time ever were some of and I don't actually have them connected to exact childhood memories, but I could look at my adult way of being in relationships, in my business, in the way I relate with my world, and see, okay, that came from somewhere. And it's almost harder for me to unpack because I don't have the conscious memory of, oh, this happened, and then I made up this other thing. So I'm going to let you keep going, but there's so much to that. Again, as I dig into your work, that I think it's going to help bring this full circle. And then I know we're going to get to how your technology really helps people to break those patterns. Because
it's all
awareness is one thing, but I don't want to spend the next 5 years being aware of this dynamic. I'm more of like let's cut straight to the chase.
You and me both.
This is why you and I are sitting here right now.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you brought up something that I think is really interesting. And it's something that I think does set my work apart from a lot of what's out there, even in the realm of, any sort of work that would deal with the subconscious. Because memory encoding is so, we'll call it subjective, others may say inaccurate, we actually circumvent the whole process of memory. So a lot of our work is not going through memory or narrative. In fact, Break Method is all about essentially meeting self-deception face to face by acknowledging that your memory and your narrative are actually skewed by your brain pattern. So even what memories you would recall or how the feelings that are attached to those memories would rise up into your body are actually more indicative of your brain pattern rather than the truth.
Yes.
And
that makes so much sense.
Yeah. And I tell clients that all the time when they're first starting this work, because there are those people that do want the truth. They want to know. And I tell my clients this, especially my private clients where I have to work with them day in and day out for months on end. You can seek the truth or you can seek healing, but you can't seek both at the same time. Because seeking the truth is absolutely oppositional to healing. Seeking the truth ends up winding you up in these loops and circles, because how can you ever really know? It's like not trusting a boyfriend. As soon as you get that hint of something feels off, if you actually let yourself go there, confirmation bias, you're going to find likely way more than is actually tangibly real and ruin your life in the process. Aren't we better off understanding how to pull back and observe the lesson to be learned and actually saving ourselves rather than getting lost in a world of misinformation and confusion? Because memory encoding is absolutely not objective. And that's one of the first things I try to help my clients understand, because a lot of times we're attached to memories that either aren't real at all, or are only real as much as they are dependent on our childhood perception of the event, which you brought up a little while ago, which I loved. A 5-year-old is going to perceive reality with limited context. They can only know what's happening and define it based on what they've already learned. So unfortunately for us, many of the things that we do and that we label, even if we consciously have learned better as an adult, they're still driven by that 5-year-old perception of reality, because our brain doesn't release those formulas. Our brain has hardwired those formulas. So there may be a slight back and forth in our internal dialogue, but ultimately we do the same thing every time until we rewire it, unfortunately.
It makes so much sense. This is, I mean, in a way, this is the piece I've been hungry for. I think that I've known is there, because there's a I have this very acute awareness that my awareness hasn't changed anything.
Yes, that right there is the social media nugget. My awareness hasn't changed my awareness of anything. So one of the things that I try to remind clients is awareness, as you know, is not enough. And awareness, I have found more often than not, leads people to justifying their bad behavior and habits rather than actually changing them. So I've found that awareness actually can be a stumbling block that keeps people stuck for a long time, especially in more of the like kind of new age, spiritual, tangential to mental health communities. Awareness becomes something that you talk about, and I see it as a barrier or a line between two people. Instead of trying to collaborate and co-reconcile realities, it's that you've been given language to describe what you're feeling and why you feel it to be true or justified. And then you end up never actually crossing the line into opposing your patterns. You just understand why. So you're able to now weaponize that language against yourself. And I'm sure you've met people like this before.
Or just where you notice there's no actual change in someone's reality. This is so good. I'm like, first of all, I'm already just knowing that I'm going to go on this journey of understanding. And the next thing I'm going to have you speak to is, okay, so how do we break it? But I want to invite you back after I've had my own personal experience to be able to speak to it, because this is the piece where I think I have these thoughts constantly where I just realize that it doesn't have to be this hard. I don't think it has to take this long. I heard on one of your podcasts, you talked a little bit about healing, like all of these ways we have to describe healing, even just these little platitudes about, and that's not to take away someone's individual experience, but I think it takes a certain level of commitment just to say, no, I don't think I have to suffer.
Absolutely
I think that's actually optional. That's what I believe for myself. I'll just say that.
I'm totally with you. I think many people aren't ready to hear that. And I empathize with that. One of the things I was talking to the Uber driver about on the way here, who's definitely going to buy my book, we were having a great chat. We were talking about how in the mental health field in general, the idea or the concept of self-deception is something that's completely swept under the rug. They don't want to talk about it, and they don't want to acknowledge that it is the problem. There's really no other problem other than that problem. Self-deception is the absolute key to our human collective breaking free of the chains of our mental health crisis. Therapists don't want to talk about it. Psychiatrists don't want to talk about it. They just want to medicate it. And I was invited to a Johns Hopkins program for brain pattern mapping. And when I got there, the whole week with all the people that we were interacting with and engaging with, they were so excited about what we were doing. And then at the end of the program, we had to present the concept of what it is, or the problem that we solve. And one of the professors who was in the psychology department was so triggered by what I said that her face turned bright red. She was shaking, and she decided to unload on me at the end. And I am used to dealing with pushback, so I handled it with poise and elegance and got through it. And at the end, one of the directors of NIH, the National Institute of Health, walked over to me with his card, and he said, listen, what you're doing will make their entire career obsolete. And she could feel it when you said it. She didn't want to acknowledge it. She wanted to fight you on it. But I'm telling you right now, don't back down for 1 second. What you have created is truly novel, and it belongs in our world. Here's my card. Call me if you need me. Because I remember getting off stage and I'm like, wow, that did not go the way I thought it was going to go, just because I had received such great feedback on the field. We were doing clinical site visits, meeting with doctors, meeting with patients. So this just came out of left field, but it just brings into the forefront how important this topic is, and how right now the traditional mental health space doesn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, because when you actually address it correctly, it ends up making most therapy obsolete. This idea that you have to keep coming back week over week, you have to keep looping through, telling your stories, talking about how that makes you feel, that is not actually the key to healing and living a good life. It's, in fact, I think impossible to level up your life if you're constantly talking about what has gone wrong in your life.
So what is the key to breaking the subconscious patterns that are holding us back?
In 2 words, pattern opposition. Our brain pattern will tell us what the world is. It'll give us all these rules of how to engage with our world, how to observe and label our reality, and it generates something called an emotional addiction cycle. So many of you can think of people in your life that you might describe as angry, and then you might describe people who are more inclined toward being anxious and observational. There are a variety of different typologies within this, but all of us have a 3-part emotional addiction cycle. We all start with fear. Some of us will then shift into anger as a protective emotion, while others of us go to anxiety as a protective emotion. So if you think about somebody who, when they get protective, they immediately yell or have an aggressive stance. I can immediately think of my dad, who, driving in a car, if he ever saw somebody swerve or had to slam on his brakes, he would yell at us. And I remember as a little kid being like, isn't this a you problem? Why are you yelling at me? But it's because anger is his protective emotion. So as soon as he feels that protective instinct, he actually goes into fight and has that instinct to attack. I go into fawn, and I immediately observe, try to figure out how I can fix this situation or placate or diffuse somebody. I'm very opposite of anger in that way. But then we have a 3rd part of our emotional addiction cycle, which is the escalating emotion. So for those of us who immediately go into the fawn response, where we try to fix things, eventually we can't fix it, right? Have you ever tried to fix something that you tried everything you could and life just kept throwing you curveballs, and you're like, all right, whatever.
Especially if it's someone that, like a personality that I get this fixation on, and this was a previous pattern that isn't as strong now, but a fixation on, like, what do I need to do to win their approval, to have them like me, to have them think highly of me. And it might be a total asshole who I don't even care to have in my life. Just really understanding the depth of how deep that pattern was for me.
Absolutely. And that's going back to the childhood trauma piece. That's a survival mechanism. If you like me, you won't hurt me. If you see value in something that I offer, or I add something to the family dynamic, then I won't be ostracized. Not every child is going to be patterned just like that, but essentially what you're talking about is the kind of the middle of the left side of the spectrum, which is about where I am. I'm probably slightly more to the right than you are, so slightly closer to midline. More just, you strike me as somebody that's a bit more organized than I am. I am not type A. So that's where I get a little hash mark to the right, but it's a good symbiosis.
Totally.
So that emotional addiction cycle is going to absolutely play a role too. And it might help to detail that a brain pattern type has 9 markers. So underneath that brain pattern type, there are 9 distinct markers that will help us understand someone's pattern of thought and how they actually label reality and what they choose to do with that label. Also, what their 3-part emotional addiction cycle is. And then the last piece is all the very highly observable behaviors that cascade. So the cascading part is very important because while many of us think that we're unique and we go with the flow or we can be spontaneous and in the moment, if you really look back and reflect, we're very patterned creatures.
Yes.
And while our thoughts may slightly oscillate, we tend to repeat the same cycles over and over again. So our behavior will do this very same thing. So just like we're describing, many people start in fear and then they'll either go into that kind of more fight, anger response, or some of us will pull back, fawn, try to fix the situation. There are behaviors that will correspond with that. So I could give you a list of behaviors right now and you could say, okay, cross that one off. Those definitely don't correspond to me. Oh, these ones definitely do. And essentially what happens here is when we're able to do brain pattern mapping, in 20 minutes, I can already predict with 98.3% accuracy how you'll label reality, what you'll do with it, how your behavior will cascade from one moment chronologically to the next, how that will affect your relationships, how that will affect your career, whether or not that will make you want to be a mom, all of those things. Those are all things that can be known in 20 minutes without anyone having to tell their story, because the story is not what does it. And I think that's what I would love to help people understand is it's actually historical data inputs that anybody can remember. Because there's some people that are like, I don't even remember my childhood. How can I even go back there?
Yeah.
It's less about the memory, because memories, as we've been talking about, they're slippery, they're intangible. It is the actual childhood inputs. Were your parents married? Was there alcoholism present? Were there siblings? And then actually getting down into the detail of what was the approach of academics? Were your parents on the same page? Was there physical discipline used? These are all things that don't require a story. And these are actually the things that make you who you are. So what do we do about it? Once you understand your brain pattern type, we know what you do, which means that we now know what you don't do.
Yeah.
So going back out into the spectrum, and if it would help, do you want me to give just like a quick snapshot of what happens on the right, so we don't just leave?
We don't want to leave our
we don't want to leave you out.
Right-handed friends.
Yes. And in the United States, we do have a very high prevalence of right-oriented brain patterns because of the way our society is. We live in a free, pretty easy world, right? We're not in like a war-torn zone. And also, just given the time and the generations, we have it relatively easy compared to previous generations. And we know that ease is going to naturally produce more brain patterns that are oriented toward the right side.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that everybody is, right? It's definitely situation dependent. But in general, America has more right-oriented brain pattern types than other countries. So as you start at the beginning, in that center of the spectrum, and you again hash mark out to the right. Oh, I did forget to mention this. I feel like it was inferred, but I'll say it explicitly. On that left side, as you hash mark out to the left, self-trust also goes up. So as you go out to that far left side, up. So you trust yourself more and more and more. But the caveat is if you get so far out to the left, again, if you trust yourself more and more and you're so situationally aware, you can become paranoid because there's too much. You don't know how to separate it out and what to take action on.
And I can see also from the relational standpoint, there's not as much space for trust in others, which is what creates a bond.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the self-trust is oppositional to trusting others, right? Part of the reason we have high self-trust is because we inherently don't trust others.
Yeah.
Whereas on the right side of the spectrum, there's a tendency to give away authority and give too much trust to other people without discernment, because you're not situationally aware and you're much more likely to be pulled into those kind of power dynamics or hierarchical structures because you're looking to somebody else to tell you what to do or to be a mentor. Whereas the people on the left, we're very unlikely to look toward mentors. And maybe, of course, they find their way into our life through friendship and things.
Yes.
But people on the left are very unlikely to look for somebody to go follow. On the right-hand side, the very opposite is true. People inherently look for others to follow. And what's interesting here, that just want to point this out, part of the input that makes that so is that these kids trusted their parents. So the idea of trusting this older person knows what to do and I should look to them with authority and respect and I should follow what they tell me to do. It comes from a good place. That's why I think when it comes to looking at something like parenting, we have to keep in mind that a lot of the things that we think that we're doing that are benefiting the child actually harm the outcome. And this is one of those things because the child doesn't learn self-efficacy. They don't learn emotional regulation. And they unfortunately believe that other holds the answers rather than from within.
Yes.
So as we hash mark out to the right-hand side now, we see situational awareness go down. So if you're right in the middle, you still have some situational awareness, but as you keep going off to the side, you become fixated on relational cues. What are they thinking about me? What does that look mean? How do I engage with this person to get them to like me? But there's a caveat here. All of these patterns on the right are rejection oriented, whereas those of us on the left are abandonment oriented.
Yes.
The rejection piece is really interesting because within the rejection pattern, they have a variety of subtypes. The easiest way to separate them, just for the purposes of the podcast, is there are types that are more conflict prone, and then there are types that are more people pleasing. The people pleasing are going to put people on a pedestal, give away all their authority, do whatever is required to be a high performer, be well-liked, to uphold the standards or the name of their family. These types of patterns are very prevalent in Indian culture, Chinese culture, some Arab cultures as well, because there is that cultural component, because what you're raised in is the input that creates the output. It's like a petri dish, right? Like curing the petri dish. So those are the people-pleasing ones. The conflict-prone rejection patterns are where it gets really interesting, because they want the mentor. They want to follow somebody. They want to emulate somebody. And in many ways, they believe that they are not good enough on their own. They have to change something. They have to strive for something. But the conflict-prone type, which is unfortunately much more prevalent, especially in the United States, they look to de-pedestal their mentor. So they try to seek out these people that they want to be like, that they want to follow, but little by little, they're actually plotting to take you down. And they will always see you being the person on the left that they probably tried to follow. They will try to demonize you as the narcissist, but this brain pattern type is actually the narcissistic brain pattern type. And I feel like for a lot of female entrepreneurs, this is the key to not getting canceled and to really create buffers around yourself, because I bet you attract these people like moths to a flame. So interestingly enough, if you look at the people on the left, right, we're typically the people who are, again, hyper independent. We typically care less about what people think about us. We might care about like a reputation if we feel like our financial security or something depends on it, or something outside of ourselves. It's not like purely for personal gain. Like for me, I can get dressed up and put on a show if that helps me help people. But am I going to wake up in the morning and put on makeup and get dressed? Absolutely not. Like the most tomboy you've ever met in your life. But I'll do it to maintain my ability to help people, right? If they're only going to listen to me if I look a certain way, so be it. I'll do it. Typically those people on the left, they tend to be more this way, where they're kind of more what maybe people would describe as a natural alpha. People just tend to gravitate toward you because you're not looking to take from other people. You're not transactional. You're just, like you're just driven by passion or purpose, and you just keep saying yes. People on the right tend not to be the just say yes people. They're the pull back, observe, more opportunistic, looking for what they can get out of it, because there's more self-serving qualities as you move out toward that right side. So again, think about it from the childhood environment. It's essentially like a toddler who is able to keep getting their way and then really never fully transcended out of being able to get their way. So to them, the world does revolve around them. The world is transactional. Well, I want to stay up a little bit later tonight, so I'm going to be like, Mommy, please, can I just stay up 30 minutes? And then if Mommy says, no, you have to go to bed, you're the narcissist. That's basically how it works out. And it sounds overly simplified, but sadly, it really does shake out this way. And they don't, the key here is, they don't see it. They are in such deep self-deception. They really feel like the other person is the bad guy. But if we were all able to pull back and understand all the moving pieces, the reality is if they're not getting what they want,
yes,
which might even be to like rip your skin off and wear it themselves, because there are those levels.
Well, some people are into that.
I've seen it. There are varying levels. Some people want to literally be you, like single white female style, which I've certainly attracted in my life. But then there are varying levels where they want what you have, but they're unwilling to do what is required to get there. Because as you move out to this right-hand side, your grit goes away, your scrappiness goes away, entitlement goes up.
Yeah.
You want what you think you're entitled to because you're unfortunately still that toddler that's like, well, mommy gave it to me and mommy loves me. Mommy says I'm the best, therefore I'm the best. But you don't realize when you get out into the real world that there are people that work harder than you. They're smarter than you. They're more emotionally regulated than you. So you can't compete with them.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that they're the bad guy.
Yes. Okay. We're going to circle back to, I want to go deeper in a moment on the pattern opposition. But since we're talking about this, being canceled is such a big fear, especially in a community like ours, where these are women who know they have a message to share, maybe a business they want to create, and it holds a lot of people back. There's clearly a brain pattern behind that. Obviously, if I'm hypervigilant, I'm looking for any sense that someone disagrees with me but one of the things that I wrote down to ask you about is this idea of how do you actually cancel proof yourself using the understanding of brain pattern mapping?
Cancel proofing and brain pattern mapping are going to have a relationship only in so much as certain brain pattern types are a little bit naturally tougher and willing to go against the grain and let the chips fall where they may, while others are more naturally going to care what people think and have more of a fear response about it. So it informs how we help cancel proof.
Yes.
It's more of an individualization. So everyone needs cancel proofing. And that's something that I've worked with a lot of private clients with on their brands. It's really more of like a resistance level. Like for me, I never feared it until it happened to me. And I mean, I guess it didn't happen to me because
we're still
definitely still here. But I went through an attempt. I went through an attempted takedown, and it was brutal. I think when we look at other female entrepreneurs, if we're looking at how you cancel proof, I'm just kind of naturally a little bit more flippant and don't care anyways. So if it hurt me that bad, I feel really bad for everyone else on the spectrum, because it was honestly the worst thing I've ever been through. And I've been through some terrible things in my life. It just comes from all angles. And I feel like the way society works is people that are kind of more this brain pattern type that we're talking about, they end up getting pulled into mob mentality really easily. And even
makes sense.
We're years down the road and still once a month, I get a DM, Bizzie, I'm so sorry. I hope you forgive me. I still have no idea why I did and said those things. I know I was making it up. And I was like, it's okay. I just kept saying it's okay. We'll move on. So the key to cancel proofing, regardless of what your brain pattern type is to radically own your message from as early as you can in your career, so that your audience doesn't feel like you've suddenly come out of the closet and shifted, because that is typically what gets you canceled.
Sure. Yeah.
So there can be a slow drip way to do it, which I've seen many people do. But you have to build, number one, a community around you that's built on transparency. And I think that's what typically people don't do, is they kind of build up a customer base on one persona. And then they start to little by little drip out what they feel or their preferences or thoughts politically or socially that are outside of the realm of what they do for work. And that is what gets them canceled, because they've built an audience that's attracted to this idea. But if you didn't always embody your full personality or opinions, it'll feel like you're blindsiding them. And then people try to destabilize your community to retaliate. For anyone that is considering coming out of the closet, so to speak, with more of their political or sociological beliefs, it's important to think all the way around how far out are these edges that you want to be able to go?
Yeah.
And what is the right, essentially, PR approach to slow drip it if you've already developed a personality out there, and be ready to deal with how people are going to respond. How am I going to handle my forum? How am I going to handle customer service? How am I going to handle when negative comments come in and all of a sudden I want a refund? So as long as you have a plan and you feel very aligned with what you want to share, and there's some bigger purpose in it, not just because I want to be like other people and talk about this. If there's a purpose, then you can get through the wobbles that will ensue. But I would highly encourage people to not test it. Come up with an overall strategy, think through the whole thing, and make sure that you know what the protocol is when people try to little by little dismantle the community that you've built, because unfortunately it just will happen. And I'm sure this is of no surprise to people, but types of people that do this are the people that are on this right side, and not the right side middle, but the far right side. There's just this inclination toward retaliation. And if I don't get what I want, or if I feel like my mentor turned on me and I was somehow duped to believe that they were X and they're really Y, instead of just walking away, they will try to destroy you.
Sure. It makes so much sense. And I think the guidance of coming back to, at any moment, just really identifying how authentic and how willing are we to just share all the nuances of who we are, to what extent do we want to share that, and then remembering that it's triggering these different brain patterns. Even just that, I think, helps to keep it from being internalized as one who might have hypervigilance could do. Oh no, like, am I who I say I am? It makes you doubt. It can make you doubt yourself. I think of earlier days, there was an experience when I was in a network marketing company, that exact thing happened. And it was a gift because it actually propelled me onto this journey, but I didn't know how to deal with it, because especially as someone who uses the fawn response to stay safe, I was like, but I did all the right things.
Yeah, and you couldn't stay safe.
And I couldn't stay safe.
Because there's no fawning response that works for these brain pattern types.
Yeah.
That's actually what they want. They want you to panic. And they actually, unfortunately, like to watch you suffer. And it actually makes it more of a high value target to keep doing it.
Yeah. Gosh. Okay. So when you talked about pattern opposition, there's obviously so much more to it. That's why the program is built around it. What do you describe pattern opposition as? Is it, okay, I know I do this, so now I just do the opposite?
So there's a longer sequence to it that actually is focused on language. I'll do my best to try to cover it quickly. But essentially, if I were to know Lindsay does the following things in this order in a relationship, me simply telling you, do this, not that, do this, not that, that would be sheerly based on willpower. Yes. And unfortunately, for most people, willpower is not an effective strategy. So we have to go further back. What actually directs your behavior? Your thoughts. And if we go one level higher than that, actually language directs your behavior. So one of the things that we focus on in Break Method is dismantling the systems of language that your brain uses to keep you stuck. Remember the mathematical formula.
Yeah.
Now take that mathematical formula and instead of making it numbers, change it to phrases. This is essentially more accurate to how the brain functions. So we have to understand how the brain pattern generates systems of language that makes your brain feel sure and rational about decisions that we actually know are going to cause harm. Because when you're living your life, even if you know better, and this is why awareness doesn't work, in the moment, not the 5 minutes, but in the actual instance, for whatever reason, your brain believes that the action that you are taking is the truth. It is the only way for survival. And it's because these rules are based on these early childhood formulas that are not relevant anymore. We've moved on. We've changed our environment. We have new possibilities, but our brain hides them. So when our brain pattern is active, I want everyone to imagine a circle. Big circle. Inside of the circle is all of your choices. You could do anything. I could go left, I could go right, I could jump up and down, I could do jumping jacks. Your brain pattern is like putting a much smaller circle inside of that circle and saying, actually, only these things inside of the small circle they're the only things that make this formula true.
Yeah.
Everything else negates this formula and puts you into a place where you could be unsafe. So suddenly jumping jacks are off the table, squats are off the table, even turning left is off the table. I only can turn right. Our brain does this all day long, and it does this again in that instant. A lot of times when we think about a situation, we think about smaller chunks of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. We are most derailed by an instant, a literally like millisecond, because a millisecond is all it takes for your brain to run through one of these systems of language. In a minute, I could look at you and I could be like, I think she's enjoying this podcast. Or if I was a different person, I could be like, I don't think she likes me very much. What's true? But none of them, they're all irrelevant. But that could happen literally. I could see one flicker of your eye and my brain could just immediately in one millisecond run that line. And how would it alter my behavior if I wasn't aware of it? And here's the really scary part. Most people are not consciously aware of this language. It runs like ticker tape. If you ever watch the news where there's just that ticker tape running in the bottom, we're not listening to it. And many of us have tuned it out. We don't like what it says. So maybe we pile affirmations or mantras over it, which honestly makes it more challenging to actually get to the root and rewire, because then you have these combating messages. I'm not enough. I am enough. I'm not enough. I am enough. Which one is it? Yeah. Well, to your brain, it doesn't matter how many times you say, I'm enough, I'm enough, I'm enough. Your brain believes you aren't for some reason. We have to figure out what that reason is and fundamentally dismantle the language, which just saying the opposite on top of it won't do. Yeah. So to change a pattern, we have to understand the language, and we have to dismantle the language in a very specific way. I like to look at this as having two lawyers operating in your head at all times. We have a defense attorney and we have a prosecutor. Have you ever seen the movie My Cousin Vinny?
No.
Okay. So I'll give a short synopsis. I'm sure many people listening to this have seen My Cousin Vinny. Hilarious movie, 90s movie, highly recommend, with Marissa Tomei and Joe Pesci.
I was like, I know, I can picture the faces associated with it. I don't think I've seen it.
It's so funny. So basically these two New York kids get accidentally put on death row for murdering somebody when they were just passing through, and it was like a total accident, but they're in Mississippi, they're outsiders, and this Mississippi town really wants to throw them in jail and put them on death row. And they immediately go with the public defender, and the public defender seems great, but they come out in the opening scene where he's doing his opening statement and he's like, and he just has a stutter and he literally can't say anything other than that. And then the kids both look at each other and they're like, we're screwed. We're definitely getting electrocuted. Like, we're done. So I want everyone to think of their defense attorney like this guy, where he literally can't even get a word out. He's not defending anybody. Then the prosecutor. The prosecutor is like Harvey Specter from Suits. Have you ever seen Suits? Okay. Love me some Harvey. So slick talking, can finagle anything, manipulative to do whatever he wants to do, right? Could be good, could be bad. Knows how to play dirty and willing to absolutely push the boundary of what's even within the legal system itself. So now inside of everyone's mind are these two lawyers, our stuttering Mississippi lawyer who can't even get a word out versus Harvey Specter from Suits. Who's going to win?
Harvey. All day long.
Harvey's going to win every time.
Yeah.
Harvey is the lawyer that represents our brain pattern. It can dig deep. It can play dirty. It knows all of our innermost fears, and it knows how to twist or distort our memories. We know the memories are already slippery, but our lawyer on that the prosecutor side, it can pull any of our deep-seated fears, any of our memories to see, this is true. It's always going to turn out like this. You should definitely do it this way. And we're not consciously aware of how this lawyer is trying to basically get us thrown back in jail, but it's happening all the time. Our defense attorney is what we need to actually be bolstering. We need to make our defense attorney better than Harvey. That is what we do in Break Method, is we equip your defense attorney with the exact right language architectures to actually dismantle the argument, which is hard to do with a guy like Harvey. You have to understand its dirty tricks. The brain is truly a dirty, filthy liar. And it comes up with all the tricks in the book, and it does play dirty. You have to understand the tactics to dismantle the argument. So you change behavior by understanding what behavior needs to change, but what language is actually pulling the strings and getting the person to do it, thinking that it's totally justified.
I am just really in awe of this. It makes so much sense when you describe it that way. I think what we are missing is these actual tools to understand all of these patterns can be shifted. And it takes that, I think, going back to what we said earlier about the self-deception. I want to really end on this because you shared it as like, that's the crux. If we're not willing to address self-deception, we don't quite have a chance to bolster that defense attorney. What do people need to know about self-deception? I want you to speak to those who are really ready. They're ready to make a change. And this is the piece they've been missing. They don't understand the role of self-deception in keeping them stuck.
Every brain pattern type has a very specific pattern of self-deception. And this is something that I go into at length in my book so that people can actually understand what their pattern is. So once we start to understand what that pattern of self-deception is, we can see where our brain is tricking us into destroying our own lives. We can then start to get clear on what language is responsible for doing the dirty work. So example would be with my brain pattern type, one of the language architectures my brain uses all the time is, I'll figure it out. I always figure it out. I'll figure it out later. I'll do it later. Somehow it always gets done. These all sound hopeful, optimistic even, but they're preventing me from doing things in a process-oriented, structured way, or learning how to say no, having boundaries. Mm-hmm. Could I figure it out? I could figure it out, but that doesn't actually mean that it's the only way I can do something. And it doesn't mean that that is not actually pulling the strings of something more destructive in my life, which it absolutely was. Just because I can do everything and figure it out doesn't mean that I should. Things like that can lead to chronic illness, autoimmune disease, burnout, collecting a treasure trove of people that are just waiting to try to take you down, right? Keeping to say, yeah, sure, I'll figure it out. Sure, I can give that to you. I can't even tell you how many people I ended up being a sugar mama for, where I was like, are we friends or am I literally your sugar mama? What is happening right now? And it's because I just kept saying yes and I'll figure it out. Yeah. So we have to also remember that self-deception, when we understand how our brain pattern actually will create kind of that circle, right? Where it's like, you could do all these things, but really your brain pattern, only these things are now true. That pattern of self-deception leads us to collect the people that will destroy us, feel justified in the behaviors that lead to self-sabotage or poor finishes, or justify commitment issues. Yeah. All of these things are part of self-deception, and our brain feels like it's doing the right thing in the moment. Yes. So we have to address that language. And as soon as you do it with the right tools, it doesn't take that long. I've worked with clients for 4 months. Done. This should be done in 4 months. You shouldn't have to dwell on your stories. You shouldn't have to be passing around tissue boxes. You shouldn't have to even talk to me about what's going on in your relationship right now. We take the brain pattern type to actually show you, this is what's happening in your relationship right now. And then you go, that's scary. How did you know that? It's like, well, because it's all a pattern. This isn't, even though it feels personal or this moment feels different than that moment, they're not different moments. And once you actually address that underlying brain pattern that creates the pattern of self-deception, you can't unsee it. That's the number one feedback I get about Break Method is you can't unsee what you see in Break. It is a radical paradigm shift that you never can come back from.
Yeah, you can't put the genie back in that bottle.
Different. No. Yeah. And you gain more empathy and understanding for other people. Yeah. You are not as reactive or retaliatory. And ultimately, when we look at the brain pattern spectrum that we've been talking about, you know, I might be 5 hash marks out to the left. You might be 7. Somebody might be 6 to the right. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is through pattern opposition and this rewiring process where we address the language is bring people back to peace. Once we get you to have dynamic range where you don't just only do things one way, and you build dynamic range, I can be this way with this person. I can have this boundary with this person. I can do things different ways and still be authentic. Then you get to peace. The people that are naturally in the middle is an interesting phenomenon because there are these people who end up plotted naturally right on the center of the spectrum. These people I rarely see in my work until they have a midlife crisis or empty nest, because eventually they realize my whole identity was built on something that is now gone. It wasn't actually built from the inside.
Yeah.
So I see those people frequently more in their mid to late 50s, even 60s. Those people, instead of all the rest of us, where we're kind of learning dynamic range to come back to peace, those people, instead of experiencing peace, they experience monotony. They don't take a lot of risks. Therefore, there's not a lot of reward. Their lives are so repetitive that they're boring. Yeah. Those clients, we have to get them to have dynamic range out into the left and right sides to shake it up. So no matter what, for everybody, the key is pattern opposition. We know from research that's come out that when you oppose your pattern and you do the things that you don't like and you don't want to do, it actually drives an increase in your feeling of purpose in life. It increases the parts of your brain that actually boost willpower and make you feel that sense of wanting to live your life, which is why I think when we look at the brain pattern spectrum, there are certain portions of it where you lose purpose and everything's about what you feel and what you deserve, and life just feels not worth living, which is why I think so many people who have it harder, even when they're experiencing hardship, are still like, I'm driven by purpose. Things could be worse.
Totally.
Right? Always looking up. So dynamic range is really where human beings should be, but we get locked in these fixed patterns to survive as a child, not realizing that there are processes out there to free ourselves and live a life without feeling so restricted and stuck.
Which is true freedom.
True freedom. And freedom is absolutely a mental construct, and most people don't feel free. And when self-deception is pulling the strings of your behavior, you're not free. But as soon as you see it and you know how to dismantle the argument and show your brain the error, your whole life changes. I've had clients in a 5-minute epiphany completely radically change their behavior.
Yeah.
And the parts of the brain that are also tied to that kind of willpower and purpose piece are the same parts of the brain that are hungry to do things that you don't like, that are willing to move into the discomfort, which is why things like, and I do make fun of this sometimes on my Instagram, so forgive me, but there are those people that think that a cold plunge is going to cure everything. There actually are certain pattern types that this may actually be true, but sadly what I have found is more often than not, the groups of people that are drawn to biohacking, they're actually the people that don't need that, because that's actually what they crave. They need the opposite. So instead of like that morning routine that has 10 steps, they need to completely dismantle their routine. Do something spontaneous. Do something giving to somebody else. Like, as much as I want to do my gratitude journal and go in the sauna and cold plunge, I'm going to completely stop my morning routine to go do something nice for my wife. That actually, for some of those people, will benefit their brain so much more than sticking to a routine. Yeah. Those of us that hate routine need routine. Those of us that love routine need to be spontaneous and chaotic.
Just having this conversation with someone the other day, that's the season I'm in, is no routine is the new routine, because that's the least natural thing. So clearly I have been ready for the break method.
Yes.
Without even knowing it. First and foremost, Your Brain is a Filthy Liar is available for pre-order starting 15th. This spring. We'll make sure to air the episode when you can get your hands on the pre-orders. And then the break method. Where can we learn more about it? Where can we connect with you? And then, I don't have it on this card, but I think your team sent over a code. I think it was just Powerhouse.
Powerhouse 20.
Powerhouse 20 to save on the break method.
Yes.
And where can we find it?
Breakmethod.com. Nice and simple. We do programs for individuals, couples, and families. The program takes between 4 and 6 months, depending on how diligently you're willing to work on your own stuff. For some people, it takes a little bit longer than 6 months. We are in it until you're done. So I think the ideal time frame for us is about 6 months. If you rush it, you don't get the juice out of it. And I think rushing it, for people that are those high performers, that's their pattern, right? It's like, let me get in and get through it. That actually is not what I would recommend for somebody. So if you're somebody who likes to get in and get out, slow roll it, go slow, let it really absorb, let it shift your entire perspective of the world, because it will.
Yeah.
It does require about 6 to 8 hours of work per week if you want to get through it in 6 months.
Okay.
So it is something where it's about keeping a pulse on it, making it part of either a daily practice or something that you're doing fairly consistently weekly. You wouldn't want to cram 1 week and then leave it alone for 3 weeks. So if you're ready to commit to it, be all in. I always tell people that it's like strapping onto a roller coaster. You're going to have fun and you're going to get off the roller coaster. The hardest part is just getting yourself to be willing to have that harness strapped on you where there's a point of no return.
Yes.
We've had over 15,000 clients. It's an absolutely game-changing program. And like I said, you can't unsee it. Once you see it, it fundamentally shifts your paradigm and you can't go back.
Mm. This has been such an enlightening conversation. I want to end with one question that is really fun to ask my fellow high-achieving friends, because a pattern, and this is one of the ways that I bring this into the podcast to break it, is I'm not always great at pausing to acknowledge even the little wins throughout the day. We just call them a powerhouse moment. It can really be anything big or small. But when I say, what's a recent powerhouse moment that you want to celebrate yourself for? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
It's easy. If I look back at my career has gone up to certain moments of peak so many times. And I have allowed my relationships to destroy it or sabotage it every time. And this time is different. And I have an amazing husband that I've been with for 6 years. We've been married. We have 4 kids. And I remember seeing how things were picking up over the last few months. And I opposed my pattern and I sat down with my husband and I said, I love you. I know traveling is hard on you and the kids. It won't be forever, but it's right now. And we have to seize this moment. And I owned it right to his face. I was like, I am taking ownership that I have let my fawning response say no to opportunities, miss out on networking events because I'm trying to keep all the balls in the air, keep my husband happy. And I just looked at him, I said, I know deep down you want me to win this time and that we're going to do this together. And I'm not backing down for anything. So don't even try it. And we had a good laugh and we have just been totally in sync on that. And I think that is the biggest takeaway for me, is that if we can notice where we went so wrong and where our brain pattern just deceived us into fixing other people's problems, or, oh, they don't want me to go into that event because they're jealous or scared. That's just a hard no for me at this phase of my life. I know he knows better. I know he's more mature than that. I know that he trusts me more than that. And that wasn't true in past relationships, right? Okay. You get locked in these cycles, and I'm not in that this time. And I believe my husband is capable of rising to greatness with me. And I just took ownership and said, we're not doing this time. And I'm not.
It's like a beautiful example of the repatterning in action.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. I love it.